I think I'll get things rolling here a little bit. I know that some people might continue to join us, but hopefully I can at least get some introductory comments rolling. As you've just likely heard, this meeting will be recorded. It is not live streamed, but it will be recorded and probably will be put on the DPW project webpage and also can be sent out. I gather that there's a listserv for the neighborhood so that those that aren't able to make it tonight can maybe watch it at their leisure and offer their feedback at another time. We also think it's a great opportunity for us, at least here in the engineering division, to record these things because we might be able to plan future projects better from them. So we're kind of recording for those purposes. The other thing that is a little bit different for us is tonight's neighborhood meeting will have closed captioning. This is something we've been talking about at the DPW and wanting to do more of, something we should be doing more of. And it's particularly important to us in the engineering department because our lead project engineer on this is hearing impaired. So this is very beneficial to him, and hopefully it's beneficial to others that are out there listening tonight. A few other ground rules to go over. I think while we very much, our goal tonight, you'll hear in a minute, is about trying to gather your thoughts and some feedback on the project as we race toward final design for reconstruction of the street. And we want to have interaction and dialogue and creative discussions, but that's a challenge in this virtual environment. So I think I'd like attendees to, as best as they can, operate such that they can hold their questions to the end, and then hopefully we'll be able to work through them in somewhat of a logical order. I would say that if we say something and you think it's really important to pause on it or to ask a question about it, I think the best way will be to, raise your hand, and we'll have people here that will help us identify you, and we'll try to get your question in a timely way. But if possible, it would be, we think, more efficient to wait until the end. And along those lines, it looks, at least based on what I can see on the screen, like many of you have your name in the profile. If you're going to ask some questions, it's really helpful for us to know who you are. And if you want to add your name to the profile, that's really good. I should mention, for those, I talked about closed caption, but for those that want to take advantage of that, somewhere at the peripheral of your screen, you should be able to click on a button that says live transcript. And then there's a second button that would allow you to show the subtitles. So take advantage of that if it's helpful to you. Other than that, before I get started, I'd just like to mention that in attendance with us tonight is the director of the DPW, Dave Cohen. We also have Lieutenant Scott Shosted from the police department, who happens to also be the chair of the town's traffic committee. So he's seen parts of this presentation. I think we also have Steve Park from the Trails Committee with us. Also really important to me, my name is Dave Hickey, town engineer, but really important to me is a small team of people that helped assemble this and will help me navigate through it tonight. That includes the assistant DPW director, Jeff Rosado Brown, my lead project engineer, Jerry Bruno, and our administrative assistant and gifted closed caption editor, Alexander Lichetti. So. And tonight's meeting is about Walnut Street, and the idea is to get neighborhood thoughts on the project. So if you're here for a school project or something else, you're in the wrong meeting. This is Walnut Street. From there, maybe we could advance.
Giving it a try, Dave, and it's not advancing, so stand by.
All right, thank you for that. Bear with us. All right. Now it's multiple advancing. So just be patient while we get our slide deck back under control. I think what we want to do tonight is just engage with you and talk about what we have found so far in the project. Our objective is to share the information that we've got so far on the infrastructure, what we've been able to put together for traffic. And most importantly, we want to talk about complete streets. And we want to engage you and get your thoughts as direct abutters and neighbors to the project, users of the street, on this topic of reconstruction, what that means to you, as well as this idea of complete streets. Our agenda is pretty straightforward. It's bulleted there. We're going to hopefully in just a few slides share the history, which many of you I'm sure will be familiar with, share what we have assembled so far for traffic and important corridor functions, talk about some challenges and opportunities that we see, and engage on this topic of complete streets. And then toward the end of the presentation, talk about our next steps, immediate next steps, and then from there, open it up to questions and answers, hopefully answers. But before we advance further, I think it's going to be beneficial for us on the public works side to maybe learn a little bit about the attendees. I think we have somewhere between 15 and 20 attendees. And we just have a few simple poll questions that will help us understand kind of your relationship to Walnut Street. And so hopefully you can just click on the button. In a minute or so, I'll do a quick countdown, give you a final chance, and then we'll end the poll. Does that look like everyone? All right, so thank you for your participation. We'll share that result. So it looks like majority of people, but not everyone, is a direct abutter to the street. Just digging in a little bit further again with basic questions. We'd like to know what you know about complete streets. Are you familiar with this topic of complete streets? And we'll just do a quick 3, 2, 1 countdown. Again, we appreciate your clicking the button. So it looks like some, but not all. So that's really helpful to me. And then one other question just to kind of help us gauge our audience. So a lot is going on with transportation and with climate action. The town has a climate action committee, which we've abbreviated CAC here in this question. We're curious about your familiarity with their goals. So we'll maybe give this is a little more complicated than the previous questions. We'll give this another 10 seconds or so. All right, so thank you very much. That helps us. So clearly people are familiar with some of the things that are being talked about in Wellesley. In particular, probably not just in Wellesley, but beyond our whole Commonwealth, talking about trying to reduce vehicle emissions. So great information for us. We do have a few other poll questions. We hope that's one way that we can engage with you while still being able to manage a virtual meeting. But maybe we'll go back to the slide deck. And I think all I wanted to do in the next few slides was talk about some things that you're probably familiar with. Just a slight delay, but what I'm hoping to do is talk a little bit about some of the background of the project. some of which I'm sure is obvious, but so Walnut Street is a primary corridor. It's part of the town's street restoration program. And just to give some background on that, there are a dozen or so primary corridors like Walnut Street that for many of them were once county roads. They came into the control of the town of Wellesley, and we planned for their reconstruction on an every other year basis. So one year we'll do the survey work and the design work, request funds for that and do that work. And then the following year we'll do the reconstruction of that street. And these are your primary corridors, your Washington streets and your Kingsbury's, your Western roads and things of that nature. And so Walnut Street is one of those. The limits for the project, and we'll show the in just a minute, are on the westerly end, the Warren Building and Warren Park, and on the easterly end, the town line right at the Charles River, also known as the Wales Walnut Street Bridge. The majority of the road was last paved in the 1990s, with the exception of the Cedar River Walnut intersection, which was paved in 2006 or 7. So it's been a while since the road is paved. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. I do know the condition of it is not great. We get somewhat regular calls, particularly after some of the recent National Grid work and the trenching work that has occurred on the project. And we know it's not in great shape. And we appreciate your patience with the condition. But hopefully if this passes at town meeting, we'll be moving forward with the project to restore that. A little more background is on the next slide. And while we're waiting for that to click up, I will say that this project was originally, we started our survey work and we had town funds to start that process in 2018. The project was delayed for, I think, some pretty legitimate reasons. One was a National Grid had a main replacement, and it makes sense to get all that work out of the way before we do a final restoration of the project. And then also the town was able to get some funding for the Great Plain Rotary project, which had some higher incidents for safety concerns. And so that project moved in front of this one and more or less has caused about a 2-year delay. Advance?
Yeah, I'm giving it a try, Dave. It's not advancing, so I'm trying some things over here.
Just be patient for a minute.
I think I'm going to stop the screen share, and then try to start it up again.
Thank you. I appreciate that. One of the problems with having an engineer pull together a slide deck is there's usually 25% more slides than is needed and the files become a bit cumbersome. Hopefully we can get this loaded. Just be patient with us.
All right.
Oh, right where we were. So this slide has got a lot of kind of facts and figures. I don't know if they're interesting to people that aren't engineers, but I think the big topic is, the big takeaway is that there's a lot of infrastructure, right? Probably not a surprise to people that live there. there's a lot to think about from the standpoint of utilities. And in particular, as we go forward and talk about possible changes to the cross section in complete streets concepts, one of the ones that sticks out is that there are 46 utility poles. So if you start thinking about realigning or changing, curb placement, then that can become a factor. Let's try to advance, Dave, since you're working it so well now. And this has just got a little more background on the project. For the history buffs in the crowd, Walnut Street was laid out by the county commissioner back in 1886, so just 5 years after Wellesley became a town, separating from Needham. It was widened and relocated in 1903, accepted by the town that same year. Those probably were joint exercises or parallel exercises. And the right-of-way is 50 feet wide with about 30 feet of pavement and sidewalks that range from 3.5 to 5 feet wide for most of the length on both sides of the road, but not all of it. And that's an opportunity and a challenge we'll talk about in a bit. And it is classified as an urban collector. One thing that stands out, at least for me, in this is 50-foot wide right-of-way. Sounds like a fair amount of right-of-way, but when you think of a pavement of 30 feet and 2 sidewalks that really should be 10 feet, you can see, and then you still have to fit utility poles. You can see how 50 feet can be a little bit constraining. We'll talk about that in a little more detail as we advance. So I'm a little fearful that most of you are more familiar with these pictures than I would like. We know there are some potholes out there. We know that the condition of the pavement is subpar. And we know that the trenching work, particularly the National Grid trenching work that's gone over the last year and a half, is a problem. The good news, I think, if there is any for us in engineering, is that we've advanced 15 cores into the roadway, into the subbase, and the subbase looks really good. And the asphalt thickness that's out there right now is thick, average of 6.5 inches. So we're developing a plan that would cold plane or grind down the top wearing surface of the road that's lost its elasticity and its structural capacity, and then replace that. And we might also look at some intermembrane layers that would put some elasticity and some bind, some adhesion between the base course that would be left behind and the new wearing course. That's something that we did recently on Grove Street, if anyone happened to see that process. And we've done in several streets in town, and we found it to be pretty successful. In some ways, it's the current replacement of that fabric that you see in that left picture, only performing much better than that fabric, which was at its time state of the art for pavement. The next few slides, I'd like to just talk about Walnut Street, its connectivity, some of its most important street functions that I'm sure many of you that live there are familiar with, but maybe this is a bit of a reminder. So one of the most important is that the Crosstown Trail runs parallel with Walnut Street for a long section and then joins up and runs contiguous with Walnut Street for about 600 feet. So it's an important connection point, and one that we want to think about as we consider reconstructing the road. We did some pedestrian counts on the Crosstown Trail itself. This was a while ago, and it was after COVID, but it indicated that there's a regular amount of activity. We found 75 trail users during a weekend and 50 on a weekday. Some more important street functions. So on the westerly end of the project is, actually I should follow the notes here. So one of the most important parts of the project is the Schofield School drop-off, which occurs right at Walnut and Damien. If you click once, Dave will bring up a little picture, that shows the proximity between Walnut Street and how you can go down Damien, which is a somewhat low traveled traffic road, and get to the Schofield School fairly safely. So it's a popular spot for drop off and pickup. And if you click again, one of the other important functions is that on one end of the street, we connect to the DCR's Charles River Reservation in the Cordingley Dam. So this is a little stock photo I stole and popped in there, but it is a real hidden gem, I think, in Wellesley by many people's opinions, and Walnut Street is not too far from connecting to that. On the opposite end, on the westerly end, we've got the Warren Park, which is a pretty well-used park, and the Warren Building, which has our rec department in it. And there's some on-street parking there, so kind of an important function that we need to preserve. And then the other thing that's interesting, we've got into the habit of calling Walnut Street Upper Walnut, so that being the section from Washington to Cedar, and then Lower Walnut, which is more of the commercial end. And it really is the tale of two roads, if you will. We'll show you some traffic data in a minute that kind of puts some numbers to that. The next slide just gives a graphic of those things that I just mentioned. It shows our project limits here in red. Shows the Warren Park and Warren Building off to the left of the page, or the westerly limit, and shows the DCR reservation, as well as the Crosstown Trail in purple. So from here, we thought we would try again to launch another poll and just get a little bit, I don't know that this will tell us a lot, but get an idea of how you use the street right now.
What if there's more than one answer? I mean, I do both.
It's a great point. It's not an easy question. I guess I would ask you to answer with what you think is the most important function.
Well, if we live on Walnut Street, they're all equally important functions.
That's right. That's right.
Fair enough. Point made.
I agree. Walk and drive are the two most important. Bike is good, but walk and drive are crucial.
Well, that's great. I think from there we'll end that one and we'll move on. And it kind of tells us, I think, what we heard from a few of the participants. Driving, probably all of you drive it. That could be 100%, but walking and driving might be slightly more favored than bicycling based on the participants of tonight. All right, so here's just a little bit of traffic. Again, I'm trying to share some of the background that we've got as we think about the final design of this project, and we want to share that with you. This is some data from 2020, so it's a little bit aged, but it gives you an idea of that tale of two streets, if you will, from Washington to Cedar. The average daily traffic is in the 1,500 to 2,000 vehicles per day. But from Cedar Street down, headed toward Route 128, it jumps up to 6,000, 7,000 vehicles per day. Probably no surprise. It's the commuting connection link to Cedar Street, I think, that drives those numbers higher. The 85th percentile, at least is gathered for this speed study, was just a little over 31 miles per hour, which, you know, is above the common speed limit of 30 that applies to the street, but not alarmingly above. We also reviewed the accidents. So In 2017, there were 3 accidents. In 2018, 3. In 2019, 4. In 2024, I think the high was 7 in 2017. And keep in mind, I know you all live it and you probably know Walnut Street maybe better than this data. These are accidents that get reported and therefore is data that we can review. There could be more, but this is sort of what we are able to access. And it tells us that there is some steady stream of accidents, but that the numbers are pretty low compared to the volume of street users. And when you look into the reports, at least what we saw was that they can be skewed by people making, I'll say, bad decisions, thinking they've got a gap at the traffic light at Cedar and River and Walnut where they don't, or thinking someone's going to yield the left turn and they don't. And then the other one that we saw a little bit of is accidents at the lower Walnut, pulling in and out of driveways. Some of the driveways and the curbs are not very well defined, and there seems to be a little driver confusion there. So advancing along. Some of the things that we want to focus on, some of the things that we're considering challenges and opportunities are that really a collector road like this should have in our opinion, should have continuous sidewalks on both sides. And most of Walnut Street does. There is a gap right now between Hunting and Cedar, and probably would be used less than maybe some other sidewalk sections, but it's something that we're looking at that should be included in this project. It's a little challenging. There are some grading issues and some existing driveways that will make that a little challenging, but we think it's important. We also think crosswalks are something that the design has got to pay a lot of attention to. Clearly there is a steady stream of traffic. The numbers are not huge at 2,000 vehicles per day, but it is important to bring pedestrians to a logical place and cross them as safely as possible. I think the corridor right now is fortunate in that it has some signalized lights as well as some pedestrian activated lights. And we certainly intend to preserve those in the case of Damien, which is fairly new, and update them in the case of the other existing pedestrian activated ones to that rapid flashing beacon that exists at Damien.
Any speed bumps being considered? I mean, particularly around Warren, as I have personally seen young children run out, and that's what really scares the bejesus out of me.
And it's a good fear. I mean, we clearly there's a lot of kids that use the park. I think what I'll do is maybe just jot that down and hold that question to the end, if that's all right with you. So curbing is another thing that we infrastructure, we're through a video work of the infrastructure that's out there. We're finishing up the drainage, in fact, this week, and it looks pretty good. If there are some improvements to drainage and sewer, they're fairly small as compared to the rest of the pavement work. But curbing is another thing that we see as a challenge for the project. We think if there is on-street parking, such as at the Warren Park, that it is appropriate, much like that picture on the left, to have granite curbs whenever the sidewalk is right to the edge like that. It doesn't necessarily, detour or steer a car away, but it does give a small amount of protection to a stroller, a walker, or whatever might be on the sidewalk when the sidewalk is right on the road edge. But for the rest of the project, a lot of Granite Street has very low profile berm right now, or non-existent berm. And so as we talk about complete streets and we talk about possible bike lanes and sidewalk improvements, we need to think about their relationship to the road and what is the best curb treatment, particularly I think in what we're calling Lower Walnut, where there aren't curbs right now, and yet there's a lot of activity in and out of the parking lots, as well as utility poles that are fairly unprotected from the road's edge. So curbing will be, in our opinion, a big part of the project. From here, we want to go into complete streets. So it sounded like some people were familiar, but just in the way of a basic introduction, complete streets is an effort to re-envision how we use our public right-of-ways in a way that would be more inclusive for all modes of transportation. The basic requirements are to provide safe, accessible options for all the travel modes. So walkers, bikers, transit users, vehicles, and people of all ages and abilities. As we design this road, and as we've designed roads in Wellesley over the last 8 or 10 years, need to really consider, how we're using the road now and how we might use it in the future. And that's one of the main reasons to have this meeting tonight, is to get your thoughts on that. And then I figure, since not a lot of people said they were familiar with it, I figured I would give you some state statistics. So right now, Massachusetts has become a bit of a leader in this complete streets initiative. It is a global thing that's going on. It's happening in Europe. It's happening throughout the United States. And our Mass DOT put out some fairly vigorous training 8 or so years ago. And most of my staff have been through that training. And the town of Wellesley took on an initiative to go through the Mass DOT process to get us through the various tier levels of approval. And right now, so tier 1 is simply adopting a policy that you think these issues of connectivity and using the streets for all users, not just vehicles, is important. There are currently 276 communities out of 380 or so in Massachusetts that are tier 1 communities. Tier 2 is when you actually put together a prioritization plan and can start to think about where you want to focus your complete street efforts. And there are currently 216 communities in Massachusetts, including Wellesley. And tier 3 is when you can apply for grants and start to implement and construct some of these complete streets roadways. And there are about 40 or so tier 3 approved projects in Massachusetts right now, one of which is Wellesley. The Great Plain Rotary project that I mentioned a little while ago was able to apply for and secure a $383,000 grant for parts of the project that included making sure we were ADA compliant and extending sidewalks and building multi-user pathways as part of that project. So if we think about some of those goals of complete streets, my engineering staff has come up with 3 options that we want to share with you tonight and get your thoughts on. The first is a bike lane. So we could repave Walnut Street, narrow the drive lanes a little bit, and construct bike lanes. There's very well-defined guidance on how you do that on each side of the road. It would result in 2 12-foot driving lanes and 2 5-foot wide bike lanes. And I'm going to show some cross sections of what that will look like. Option 2 is a share the lane, commonly referred to as sharrow. So this is an option where the bicyclist signs and pavement markings are put out so that the bicyclists and the vehicles share the pavement space. This was something that we did here in Wellesley. If you've been on Cliff Road, when we repaved it a few years ago, we put out those signs and the pavement markings, and that was a good choice for Cliff Road at that time. And then option 3 was something that came up fairly quick after we completed our survey when you think about the functions that I mentioned, the fact that Walnut Street connects a rec building and a popular town park to a crosstown trail, and then also to a state park. Maybe there's an opportunity, maybe this is a street that wants to have something even more substantial. So option 3, you'll see in a minute, is the idea of putting a multi-use path on one side. Now, this is not, say, Nantucket in the 12-foot wide, 2-lane bicycle user path, but maybe something that would be 8-foot wide that would facilitate multiple people walking beside each other, as well as bicycles being able to pass each other in both directions. So this is kind of a cross section. Hopefully cross sections make sense to the audience tonight, gives you an idea of what option 1 would look like. And the big picture here is the dark lines on the outside perimeter are the 50-foot right of way, the space that we have to work within to be able to fit all the components that we would like to have. So if we were to make a bike lane, by the time that you're done, it's approximately a 32-foot wide paved area. So approximately 2 feet wider than exists out there today. And we would narrow the driving lane and put pavement markings down that would allow bicyclists to have their own space in each direction of the road, and still be able to construct 5-foot wide sidewalks on each side. One thing that's kind of subtle in this drawing, but I think is worth mentioning, is that we've added the utility pole, because I mentioned that there are 46 of them on the project. And so as we think about moving curbs, how that utility pole fits and how many utility poles we're contemplating relocating could be cost drivers for the project. So we just wanted to share them in this graphic. So these are just some visuals to go with option 1. On the left side is a stock photo of what a bike lane looks like. In that particular picture, there is both on-street parking and a bike lane. And then on the right side is our own Washington Street here, not too far away from Walnut, where we were able to put a bike lane in when we repaved that project a few years ago. Advancing to option 2. So this is the Sharrows concept, which encourages the cyclist and the motorist to share the space. It would be the smallest pavement width, so you can fit a drive line and a fog lane. It gives a little bit of space for bicyclists and vehicle to solve their conflicts. And we would recommend, if this is the direction the town wants to go, a paved width of about 26 feet. And again, sidewalks on both sides, as shown in this concept. And you can see one of the impacts of something like this, where you're able to narrow the road, is not only is there a little less imperviousness, but you have a little more flexibility with where the utility poles are likely to fall. And if they can fit into that grass strip area, they maybe less utility poles have to be relocated. And advancing to just a few little graphics of photos of that. So again, a stock photo on the left, it shows how the pavement gets marked with that kind of chevron above the bicycle symbol, and a car and a bicyclist can both interact. On the right side, that's our Cliff Road that I mentioned, where we did do Sharrows. I know that you might have to strain to be able to see the pavement markings, given the distance and the tree shadow, but you hopefully can see that there are some pavement markings, as well as the sign that's located on the right side of the photo. So that's what we call a Sharrow. And option 3 is something that came, I will share that we've taken this early design concepts to our traffic committee, as well as the town's, the mobility subcommittee of the climate action committee. And there seemed to be some feedback from both of those groups that said that a multi-use path might make a lot of sense here. So that's what this third option is showing, where we would still have a sidewalk on one side, but we would make a slightly wider sidewalk on the other side. In this case, it would be the north side, or the side that is connecting the Warren Building and the Crosstown Trail and the DCR Park. And so under this scenario, you could get back to a slightly narrower road width in the 24-foot range, and you would have sidewalks of 5 feet on one side and the multi-use path of 8 feet on the other side. And again, we've left the utility pole in there. Not to say that there wouldn't have to be some utility pole relocations, but you've got more flexibility when you have a wider grass strip. And we do have what are classified as multi-use paths in the roundabout of the Great Plain Rotary project. So they're to meet the definition of a multi-use path, you have to have a minimum width of 8 feet. And we did that for the roundabout because we don't want bicyclists in the roundabout. We would prefer for them to be out on the multi-use path. But then shortly thereafter, you go down to 5-foot sidewalks on that project. So it's a little bit of a blended example, if you will, but I did try to show one photo. This is something one of our traffic consultants was able to share with us from Natick. I don't know if the scale of the photo skews it a little bit, but that is an 8-foot wide sidewalk over to the right. And it's an area, I guess, where the traffic engineers explained to us that they would have liked to have a bike lane. It's just that there's this bus drop off there in the foreground, and the bike lane didn't make sense. So they chose for that particular project to put a multi-use path over to the side. So I'm guessing it looks like some questions are popping up in the chat, but maybe before I get to them, we can launch our last poll question. You've heard me talk, hopefully not to the point where I've exhausted you, but to the point. Oh, okay. So, yeah, I would skip to the next one. I must have missed that. So you've heard me talk about, option 1, 2, and 3, and maybe just based on our audience tonight, option 1 being bike lanes, option 2 being sharrows or share the road, and option 3 being a multi-use sidewalk on one side.
Hey, Dave, can I ask, what is the width of the street today?
On average, 30 feet.
Okay, so divide by 2, 15 feet per lane, and we're talking about 11 feet here in all 3 options.
So in all 3 options, we would stripe a driving lane that is 11 feet. That's they're currently allowing down to 10 feet. We're finding that not to work that well. So we would stripe 11 feet. It would be paved to be 12 feet wide so that there's, a 1 foot wide fog line on the side.
Okay, so just so I'm understanding, today it's 30, it will be 12 per lane, so 24. So no matter what, all 3 options are decreasing by 6 feet total across 2 lanes. Is that accurate?
No, not true of the option 2. I'm sorry, option 1, which is a bike lane. A bike lane would have the widest roadway paving cross section and would increase by about 2 feet. You need about 32 feet to be able to fit 2 drive lanes and 2 bike lanes.
Dave, I found it difficult to vote on this because it seems like there are some other issues, like talking about the imperviousness, increasing that in some of the options. And it's sort of mentioned, but you didn't really go into it. And those are also important issues for us to understand long-term, obviously, when deciding for our neighborhood and community.
So I think maybe now is the time to kind of dig into those questions between your question and the previous, and we can maybe hold that to the end. You know, I didn't come to tonight's meeting to say option one would increase imperviousness by 6%, and option two decreases it by 10, and option three by 4. I don't know that we're at that level of design, nor was I sure that was helpful. I guess what I'm trying to hear, or what I was hoping to hear tonight, was that how many of you think the function, right, and really think a multi-use path makes a lot of sense. The function is more important, or maybe what I'm starting to hear from a few attendees is that reducing imperviousness is more important. I mean, I guess I'm open to hear your comments. I know we put out the poll, and it was just a way to start to engage with you and to start your pulling out your thoughts on it. What I would say is that at the very end of this, I'll have my email up there. You can send those questions and I can provide more specific answers. But the feedback I'm looking for, I guess, is, do most people think that a reduction in imperviousness should be a high concern to the DPW and redesigning and reconstructing this road?
I think it's
And
challenging.
it's very hard to do that in a virtual meeting.
Okay to talk, maybe?
Please.
I can't. Yeah, thank you. Sorry. I think it's challenging if the road continues to carry the kind of heavy traffic that it currently does, to get the benefit from a bike path when the road itself ends up getting narrowed. Because I just can't imagine some of the large trucks here being able to use the road without infringing on the bike path. So that's why I chose the share option, which is not my favorite option, but it felt like the most practical one for this road. I cycle on this road a lot because I live on, my address is a Walnut Street address, and I cycle regularly when the weather's better. And I'm very familiar with the problems on the road. I don't have really a problem sharing the road with that option. But I think if you stuck me in a bike lane, I would be constantly concerned that people will infringe on it. The traffic is just, the trucks that come down here are just too big. So that would be a concern of mine, and it's why I would have voted not to do it, despite not liking the outcome.
May I make a comment to what Mark indicated as well? I live at the corner of Walnut Street by Cedar and Walnut, and I have to say the amount of trucks that come by our house, it literally shakes our house due to how heavy or how large they are. So that is a concern for me. If we were to add bike lanes, I wouldn't even feel safe, riding a bicycle down that road. Personally, I would either take Washington Street, even though that's just as busy, or just ride it along the trail that connects to Walnut.
The other thing, sorry, I'll try not to dominate Q&A here, but the other thing is, if some of these, the proposals that you made would seem like they would eliminate that on-street parking that is currently outside the Warren building. Is that true?
No, definitely not. Whatever option we think makes the most sense for the car would have to transition. That parking is pretty important.
Yeah,
it
okay.
allows access. So it just will go through a bit of a transition, whether it ends the bike lane or whether it becomes, on sidewalk or something.
Okay.
That parking, I think, pretty important.
Yeah,
And to
I
those
did
2
too.
points, I would just say that this is the challenge, right, with bike lanes, and I think particularly here in Wellesley, where we're looking at a 50-foot right of way. if you really had a lot of bike use and you really were focused on doing what is safest and best for the bicyclist, today's guidance is directing us toward these buffered bike lanes, right? Where there is the protection against the trucks and a little more space is given so that the bicyclist can have that higher level of comfort and safety. That's a real challenge in a 50-foot right of way. You saw my graphic and you can see we run out of space.
Yeah.
It wasn't an option that we think fits. And to Mark's point, that leaves you with some sort of a compromise, but hopefully one that works best for all the users, right?
But I'm looking at this, and I mean, I'm at the other end, so I'm right at where there is no, the people that turn off of Washington Street onto Walnut, it's frightening. And then you hit Warren School right away. And do any of these make it safer for the little kids? I mean, I'm literally across the street, so you put any roads in, it'll probably have a negative effect on me, but I'll do anything because those little kids, I just, it is a frightening. They just bolt out there, So are any of these options going to help that concern? I mean, are we considering how you can make it safer for that playground? Because they come out of that gate, which is right between, what is it? Fairbanks and the one closer, Washburn. They don't look. God love them. They just don't look, and I'm not blaming them. They're just children, but what would make that more safe? Is that being considered?
So just to make sure that I heard it correctly, Louise, the concern here is that some of the sidewalk users, kids crossing and or darting into the street. And I think what we will do with the project will make it safer. And those things will be where there are pedestrian activated crosswalks now. They'll get the new style RFB. So that will help the drivers be more alerted to the person that does the right thing, presses the button, not necessarily the darter out into the street. We also will resurface when the pavement is done with pavement markings that are considered high visibility crosswalks so that hopefully the driver is made even more aware, both in nice weather, but more importantly in inclement weather, that there's something going on here. You're coming up in the Warren Park building. There were two crosswalks somewhat close together.
And they're great. Yeah.
And so
well
that when
used.
we put a little more focus on them, I think we can, when we're done with the project, make the driver more aware.
Can we put a stop sign there? I mean, because the cars don't stop off of Washington Street. They may supposed to be, but the way it's sort of a bend, and so they don't reduce their speed, and that's what I'm seeing. Yeah.
So stop signs are governed by a MUTC, by the Federal Highway Administration. We can't just put them in to stop cars, particularly in something that is not an intersection. And there are some warrants that you look at, the volumes of vehicles and who has the right of way and who doesn't. I'm listening to you. I need to digest it a little bit more, but I think that the answer is going to be to give as much visibility and attention to the crosswalk as we can, as well as there might be some opportunities to reach out to users of the park. Maybe there's some signage that can go onto the fence that are nearby that just talks about, the importance of using the crosswalks and operating safely.
Yeah, I think,
We've got,
sorry, I think if the north side expansion that you talked about, I forget which option it is, which is to expand the width of the sidewalk on the north side of the street, sounds like the most viable option to me, because it gives the kids who are around Warren Park an opportunity to ride their little bikes on the sidewalk, even though if it's not designated as a bicycle path, they could get up and down Walnut Street without having to actually be on the pavement. That would be a compromise. That plus the share the road cyclist option might be the easiest thing to get from where we are today to a safer setup.
Yeah, I think that that's another great comment, Mark, and I really appreciate it, because I do think at least when I look, I do know, I observe cyclists what might be like you. It sounds like in nice weather that are using a bicycle to commute to work, right? Fantastic. And I do see them on Washington Street. I see them less frequently on Walnut, but I've been told by several cyclists that they think that would be a nicer route and a slightly less volume and safer route compared. I know that might be different than some of the comments I've heard tonight, but that's the perspective of some cyclists. But many cyclists like you that are commuting, that are what I might call professional grade cyclists, are still comfortable in the road. And yet those that might be out with a family, with kids, the weekend, or they're going to the park, they are uncomfortable, certainly in the street, and all that accommodated in a 5-foot wide sidewalk. So I kind of like where you're going. I think that when you think about this corridor, in my mind, one end of it is commercial, but the majority of it is quite residential in character, and certainly a place where there are a lot of families. So I take your comment to sync up to those users very well.
Okay.
I know we've got Christina has raised her hand, and I think it's been a while. So.
Oh, it's Kevin.
I'm right here.
Christina's here too. Just regarding the crosswalk by Warren Park, the way the parking is laid out right now, some of those parking spots encroach on the visibility. So the kid, I have several kids that are darters across the crosswalk. I apologize. But in driving on the road, one of the challenges is the way the parking spots are laid out too close to that crosswalk that's near the gate in Warren Park. So you can't see the people approaching the crosswalk.
And that one doesn't light up. So even if the 3-foot tall kid presses the button, the ice cream truck will block the child, and they think they're clear, but there's cars coming quickly. So it's, if you're tiny and there's cars on either side of you and a huge ice cream truck, it's hard to be seen if there's no light. So if they took away a couple spots, it could be easier. And I agree on the little bikes. The kids don't go on the street, so I like the use of the multi-use path, because that would really encourage the kids, to be safe. And you can pass someone on the sidewalk, which right now is really tough because it's pretty narrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Love those comments. I know that we're going to be looking pretty hard at the way that's striped right now. We've got some comments from, I think, I forget what group, Trails. We need to look at maybe an ADA accommodation, as well as the potential to get better visibility. So comment heard. Thank you for it. So I think, yeah, why don't we go back to Louise? I know your hand is raised.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can we think of, is there any option that when you get the cars that aren't necessarily are worried about getting to work fast, and they make the turn off of Washington Street onto Walnut, can we just put a safety bump? I mean, it could be in front of my driveway. I mean, just something to say, look, guys, slow down, because it's not that far between those two. I'm just before, my house is one of the three at the very end, and so it's just before that first gate where the kids go in and out, and then there's the second one. And I like everybody saying make that sidewalk bigger. At least that gives the kids a little bit more time. I can't worry about the ice cream truck. Make the ice cream truck go down to the park, to the park below. Park at the if it would just move, that might help.
All right, well,
Hey,
thank
hey,
you for that.
Dave, sorry, one last question, sorry. Are you considering any of the intersections with the side streets off Walnut? The Walnut Whittier corner is a disaster, has been for years. It's got a huge trench. It's been used for storage for every piece of work that's been done on Walnut. So it's gotten dug up a lot, and it collects, like this weekend, it will collect a ton of water and ice in the corner. So I'm just curious if your plan includes sort of invading some of the intersections at all with the side streets.
So the plan includes a few things. For all of the side streets, we'll look at standardizing the radius that comes in. One of the things that we're doing on our projects is, in many cases, and I think Whittier is one of them, although I don't have the plan in front of me, embarrassingly so, is a wide radius. And so if we can tighten them, that helps the side street know that they need to stop and then advance beyond that. And so that is part of the project. The other thing that is part of the project is we've surveyed all of it. So we have all the grades, and we've got the limits that have been disturbed, as you pointed out, for the various construction activities. And those would get repaved. It doesn't repave Whittier itself, but there is going to be work that's done. Also, it's not one of the.
Thank you, Christina, our next door neighbor.
There's a visual of Walnut at Whittier. We storage on the left, and it is a disaster. Sorry to interrupt.
That was quite funny.
I would also say that strip of Whittier, when work is done on Walnut, becomes a parking lot for all the construction equipment. And
They just said that.
Yeah.
it doesn't just tear up the road. It's just, it's a nuisance to have those trucks idling, diesel engines idling all day and overnight.
So we will have a little better control of, which is not to say construction won't be painful. I know that you have all been through a lot with National Grid. It's been an extended period. And as we go forward, our contractor will also cause, I'm sure, some pain and suffering. There'll be some delays. There'll be occasional detours and or one-way traffic control. There certainly will be noise and dust, but now the DPW will be administering that contract. And so we can control more tightly anyway, the impact to the side streets. And the picture did refresh some of the discussions I've had. I think there is a plan for Whittier, but it would follow the Walnut Street work, and anything that was damaged recently and or is damaged by our construction would get restored.
Okay.
And then maybe just to go back to the speed bump comment, because it comes up a lot. Speed bumps are not everything that you think that they are. Currently in town, we have got a prohibition on what they call vertical elements. So speed bumps, speed tables, speed rumble strips, and things of that nature. We have tried a few. We've done some demonstration projects. We even had a temporary layout. And the one thing that I would ask you to think about is that the downside to a speed bump is that there are offsetting impacts, right? So depending where you are on the street, and if we're up by Whittier, that's 2,000 vehicles a day that are slowing down and then immediately accelerating on the other side of the speed bump, as well as the 10% of the people that don't pay attention to it and lose a hubcap and things of that nature. Our experience has been that over a long corridor, they're not adjusting vehicle speeds all that much. They adjust it in one discrete area, and that also comes with an impact. It comes with a noise and acceleration, deceleration, sort of exhaust issue. it has not worked very well. I get your point, and there, we can work closely with the police department. Maybe there are things we can do. I know as we pave roads and they're freshly paved, a common comment is, wow, now people are driving even faster. And we've been able to put out some of those portable speed registering signs kind of in the immediate aftermath of the construction, just to remind people what the speed limit is.
Or maybe bill us, if we're going too fast, you get the automatic ticket in the mail.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll get the ticket, but I just slowing people down. But it's right at that corner, but unfortunately it's right at that corner near the school. Now, to Mark's point, if you expand that sidewalk, it will help the kids, I hope. But I understand your point that if you say it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I'm not trying to push something that doesn't work. If 10 years ago, they were going to make that intersection square and put a light right there. I think the people that didn't like it on the other side of Warren, I don't know the name, Pine Street or something, they won, I guess. And that's why that didn't happen.
I can also look through my files to see, I don't remember a recent traffic study there. It is the thresholds to qualify to put a light are pretty high. And that might have been when there was a school there, I'm not sure, but I'll take a look.
It was 10 years ago. So the Warren was gone because I've never been here when the school was there, but it was a big political hoop de la because the intersection was going to be moved. So I'm not trying to get politics involved again. There was a lot of politics. I remember about that.
I noticed we have a few other hands for people that haven't had a chance to speak. And let me start with our select board member, Beth Sullivan Woods. Thank you for joining us.
Nope. I'm actually speaking as the mother of, I hope he's a former darter, but coming down Longfellow. I think the thing is, although Warren's not a school, all the glee jumps up in those children when they see the park. And they just go for it. And it's a pretty scary thing when they hit that Longfellow Walnut kind of V to head for the school. It's just kind of the visibility feels a little bit scary when they go darting. And I do hope mine's not darting anymore. I just don't know. But I'm wondering if there are protocols that you might apply if it was an active school that we could leverage, because it has all the behaviors and kind of, loose, happy children that a school has. So if there's anything we could do to put in more of those school-like safety protocols, just something to think about.
Yeah, another great comment. I mean, it would not classify as a school zone that would create a legal speed limit change, but we might have some to your point, we might have some flexibility and we might be able to do some things, certainly playground and some other signage that brings more attention to it. And did I see another hand? Oh, okay. I think I have a few others here. Some of these in the chat that were addressed, but there's a few that aren't. I guess let me start with one of them was, can we just keep it as it is? Which is, I think, probably wouldn't be my preferred option. As I mentioned, it's 30 feet wide. If you were to repave it as 30 feet, that gives you a fairly wide driving angle, wider than we're doing in design these days. And as the road gets wider and looser, studies are showing that I won't say encourages speed, but at least allows higher speed. So tightening the road width will hopefully help us a little bit with speed issues. It also, at its current width, leaves a bit of an awkward, what we call the fog lane. The lane between the white mark and the curb is 3 feet wide right now if we were to rebuild it the way it is. So not wide enough to be a bike lane and too much space for a car. So I think we would prefer to find land on one of these options as opposed to leaving it exactly the way it is now. There was a question about data on cyclists per day. So we do have counters that count cars. We have a trail counter that the NRC was able to secure through a grant that will count walkers and bicyclists on a trail. We don't have an easy way to count cyclists other than observations. But I will reach out and find out if maybe some of our traffic consultants are doing some more there. That's always one of my instincts. If we're gonna invest money in a bike lane or whatever it is we might be contemplating, what's the data behind it? And I think it's a good instinct, but I would also tell you that if you look at, the Climate Action Committee's goals and you look at some of the data that's out there on complete streets, what we're contemplating here is not just what the use is today, but what are we going to do going forward? Because we've got a vehicle problem, right? We have to find a different way and our streets aren't going to get wider. So I will try to get some more information on cyclists, but it might not be as much influence as you think. What else? There was, I think one of the questions, and we've heard this on Grove Street, and it is in the chat about undergrounding utility poles, which is not something we're contemplating as part of this project. I can tell you that it is not an exercise sort of to be taken from a construction scheduling or construction cost standpoint, not to be taken lightly. We did reach out to the MLP because we thought this question might come up, and they feel that taking all of the poles and putting them in a concrete encased conduit with manholes for the whole corridor would be in the range of $6.5 to $7 million. And that's just the MLP piece. The Comcast piece, they gave us an estimate of about $1.5 million, and Verizon said that they wanted a account of $10,000 so that they could do the engineering to give us an assessment of what the cost would be. So if this is a roadway project that is in the $2.5 to $3 million range, the idea of undergrounding the utility poles extends it well beyond a year and probably quadruples or maybe even higher increase in the cost. So not something we're contemplating. All right. And then
Can
I think
you just touch again on, the area between Damien and Cedar is like much narrower than the rest of the road. Some of the houses are like very, very close to the road. It doesn't seem like you have 50 feet. And so what can be the alternative down in that area of the road? I mean, it's much narrower.
And if I could add to that, the eastbound lane has been disrupted by the National Grid trench that has been filled in with what looks like a 3-year-old kid's construction kit. Potholes, washboard surfaces is dangerous. It wrecks the front ends of cars, and it's more than uncomfortable. It needs to be fixed. When is National Grid going to be held to this?
So I'll take them in the order they were presented. The first is the right of way is 50 feet. I know that it feels different. The houses as you get in that stretch do not have the same front yard setbacks. And I will also say that there are some driveways where maybe people park right now where they're straddling the right of way. So it, as I mentioned, extending the sidewalk kind of in this area is going to come with a little bit of challenge, but we think it's important, and we will review it with those particular abutters. The right-of-way does not narrow down, just the roadway narrows and the houses get a little closer to the street. The National Grid piece, I know I've gotten a lot of comments. I know that I will say that we've been working with National Grid. They've been out there several times. They have had a schedule to do trench repair more than once. Some of that has been impacted at various times. My permit engineer was out with them just this week, and that section that you're talking about, they have a plan in place to patch it. One of the struggles here, not to make any excuses for National Grid, but one of the struggles is that when they did this work, our original hope was that they would have been done last spring, and this project would have been constructed this last summer. We would have followed a little closer, one behind the other. That isn't the way things turned out, so the gap in there is a little longer than we expected, which doesn't make an excuse for shoddy trench work, but that's one thing. And then the other thing is they feel like that they've dealt with a variety of asphalt thicknesses, and we've had discussions about them grinding and paving a wider stretch, almost putting like a permanent patch on it. And some of those discussions have gone into the realm of, does that make sense if this project is going to be starting up here shortly? But the piece that you're talking about is in very bad shape, as are a few other pieces. And National Grid has assured us that crews are coming very shortly to make the repairs. So it looks like Jennifer has a raised hand.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm Jennifer Houston. We're have a Tennyson Road address, but our side yard is Walnut. So hi, all Walnut people and whatnot. Two questions. One is related to, I believe, Steve Lyle's question about the width of the road and accommodating the 50 feet. Do you anticipate needing to have a few feet of people's property involved in the project?
So no, not right now. I mean, I will say that there will be some discrete properties that we need to talk about. Hedges, some of which overhang into the 50 feet, but based on our survey are not in the 50 feet. And one of the things about Walnut Street is, by and large, the grades are relatively flat. So we think we can get our work done without impacting private property. There might be a few people, residents that I'll reach out to. And then the one that comes up quite often, and since I have some potential residents here at the meeting tonight, is that sprinkler systems sometimes ignore right-of-way lines. And when we build the sidewalk, we bump into them. So if you know that your sprinkler system is out there and you want to contact me, we can try to show it on the plan so our contractor is aware of it and so that he protects it. Typically what will happen is, if we know where it is, when we construct the sidewalk, we can deflect it and leave it off to the side so that your landscaper or you can reconstruct it. When we don't know where it is, occasionally it gets damaged, and of course we'd fix that, but you know, it might mean your system is down until we can get it damaged. So sprinkler systems are the one exception that I know of right now. Some of them I've seen, but many of them you can't see.
Thank you. Wait, I had one more question, please. And that is, what is the timing of this project?
So if all goes well, we're scrambling to complete the design plans. We're anxious to hear some of the input that we get tonight. We have been in front of the town's traffic committee. We've been in front of the mobility committee, and we're hoping to put design detail to the plans and present to our DPW board and the select board, and then advertise this. In an ideal world, we'd do all of that in the months of February and March so that we can advertise this by the end of March and bring to town meeting in April what we call bids in hand, know exactly what the project costs. It's going to be tight, and that's our objective. If we have that all lined up and we get favorable action at town meeting, we would construct this summer. I will share with you the one piece that is a little bit in flux is National Grid tore up your street for, the whole piece between Washington and Cedar. And not too long ago has developed some plans to dig up Walnut Street from Cedar going halfway to the Charles. And that is problematic for us. That's going to be hard to construct. It's high volume. And one of the things we're in discussions with them about, and I have to sort of report back on, is that we might do this project in 2 phases. We might build the Washington to Cedar Street this summer, assuming there's funding, and then do the lower Walnut Street piece the following summer. There's some benefits to that. It allows us to better manage detours, traffic, police details arranging for those. It also allows the National Grid trench work to settle for a year before we put final pavement on it. So that is a little bit unknown, but I'm couching my answer so that we do think we can build most of the roadway in 1 season, but the National Grid pieces on Lower Walnut might impact that.
Thank you.
Dave, I just want to mention there are some places on Walnut Street where there's bricks and cobblestones encroaching into the public way, and that's including the walkways and the driveways. So there might be places where we're going to have to cut back those bricks and cobblestones right at the property line to do the paving. And I know you mentioned something about the sprinklers, but I just wanted to bring up the cobblestones and brick pavers.
Great comment. Thank you for that, Jerry. I know we bump into this in a lot of projects, and I'm glad you mentioned it because, well, when we do bump into those, obviously there are beautiful houses all along Walnut Street with beautiful landscaping. And when we bump into cobbles or bricks or things of that nature that are out in the public way, that's not a material that the DPW maintains. So we typically will remove those and replace them with asphalt, draw a clean line somewhere so that the bricks and the cobbles are on the private property and the asphalt is what's on the public property. As we get into the specific homeowners that Jerry's referring to, I'll reach out to them and let them know that that's something that's coming up. But it goes, I think, to Jennifer's question about, question about, do we expect any private property impacts? They are private property and that somebody installed bricks or stones or cobbles, but they're in the public right of way. So we'll remove them. We do impact them that way. We typically will stack them somewhere if a homeowner wants to use them elsewhere in the property or keep them as salvage or whatever they want to do. We try to work collaboratively that way, but we don't put them back into the public right away because we don't maintain those materials. Any other hand raised? So I think in a roundabout way, we've got to my way of thinking many of the comments in the chat. Are there any other hands raised? The one thing I'd like to do, I don't think we have to go back to the slideshow, but just to kind of hit the things that, although maybe, Dave, is there a way to get the last slide up there that has my contact info? Awesome.
Yep.
The one thing that I will mention is, once again, our schedule. So we're going to take this feedback. We're going to meet as a design team, and we're going to continue to work on our designs and our estimates. It's very common that after this meeting, you replay it in your head and or you pass it to a neighbor who has other thoughts. And I would encourage you to send those to me via an email that you're going to see on the screen or a phone call, whatever is most convenient for you. And then I'll just share the other one. Jerry talked about cobblestones. You will get, before the project starts, a letter telling you that the project is about to start and that when the project is complete, there's a 5-year moratorium on the street. So this means that you can't open up the street to install new utilities for a 5-year period unless it's an emergency. So if you are thinking of, you've got a sewer lateral that's misbehaving, you jet it and you're thinking of replacing it, it would be good to contact me and or think about moving that up to get that done sooner rather than later. If you're contemplating electrical upgrades, that's another thing that we often hear. It'd be good to get that done so that your work is done and out of the way before we come in with the final pavement. There's time and we can work with you, and any contractor that you might hire, we can figure that out. But if you're thinking about it, it's good to move it to the forefront. And so my information is there, and feel free to call or email, whatever's most convenient. From that, I don't, Dave, did you have any closing thoughts?
So Dave, I do see it. I think there's a raised hand.
Hi there. So are you saving the chat so you see these comments, or are these all just go away?
We will save the chat as well as the transcript of the meeting.
Okay. And lastly, I just didn't hear anything. Maybe it's just wasn't mentioned because it's just one area, but in the chat, I just mentioned the right turn, going eastbound on Washington Street onto Walnut, and it's just really, really tight. I'd be surprised if anyone's able to stay in that lane like easily. Is that something, I mean, you don't have to even answer that, but it's something you guys should consider, because the way it's drawn up, right, like as is definitely not adequate and not safe for anybody in either lane. So just something to consider as you do this on that corner.
Certainly we can. Some of that was repaved as part of the Washington Street project. But Zach, can you just give me a little latitude? Which turning movement are you talking about?
Yeah, so it's in the chat as well. But if you're driving eastbound on Washington Street, and you're taking a right turn onto Walnut Street, right where Louise lives, where she said people go really fast. So I mean, people, even if you're going slow on that turn, you're immediately in the opposite direction of traffic on that turn every time.
Okay. All right.
And
Well,
I will say I am glad, because I have seen lately, I've seen a cop right there parked. So I think that helps people go a little bit slower, but obviously that's not a great permanent solution. But yeah, I have been glad to see that lately, but it is really hard. And I'm always worried I'm going to be pulled over right there going in the opposite lane of traffic, but it's almost impossible to stay in your lane.
And you can't tell whether it's because they have, if you look at it, maybe the marking on the road, they can drive a little bit further and then turn left, turn. I don't know, but something's wrong.
okay, something we can certainly look at.
And so Dave, if you're done, I did just have a couple quick comments to make. First, just wanted to thank everybody again for taking the time to come out tonight, share your input with us. It's really important and valuable to us to hear directly from you. Dave shared his contact information, and just wanted to let folks know that we will be, we've actually already activated a Walnut Street reconstruction page on our website on our projects page. So you can stay tuned there. We'll post a recording of this meeting there, along with the questions from the chat. We'll probably have some frequently asked questions, and reach out to us anytime if you have questions or more comments. We definitely want to hear that. So again, thank you all for coming, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
And if I can piggyback on, I want to say thank you for your patience. I go to a lot of these Zoom meetings, and very often we've got consultants that organize them, and they make it look really easy. And I think you saw us kind of go through it. It's not, I think it's difficult to engage in the way I was hoping to engage in a virtual format, but I really appreciate you being patient with us. And I really appreciate the types of comments we get. It's very helpful.
Thank you, guys. It was really very informative.
It was. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Stay safe, everyone.
Take care. I'm gonna leave now.